next question. This is to Jeff. What changes would you make in the use of debt for the city of Newton?
Well, certainly we've got to increase our debt in terms of the capital budget, as you mentioned that we have a problem there. Right now we're spending about 3% on maintenance, and we have got to increase that, and that means utilizing debt in a much more effective way than we have in the past. We are going to be facing in the very near future in some way a serious debt problem relative to the Newton North project, because we have to pay for that. You know, we're building that building, and in another, I guess another year it's going to be done, and sooner or later someone's going to come to us and say, okay, now's the time to pay for it. And that's going to be a bonded expense, and it's going to be, by my guess, probably $6 or $7 million per year, either out of the operating budget or out of probably a debt exclusion. And we've got to be able to get that under control and have that expense dealt with before we start expanding the other ones. But in general, we need to have a more aggressive bonding system than we currently have.
Sydra?
Well, one of the issues that we have has to do with the fact that for many years, and many of us feel he was an outstanding mayor, Ted Mann, insisted that we could bond no more than $5 million no matter what needed to be done. He was someone who watched his pennies very, very carefully and would not let us go forward with an extensive program. He always said, you know, what can you manage with? He was not forward thinking in terms of the capital assets, and we are now living with that. Also, we cannot forget that Proposition 2.5 basically cut our ability to move forward, and everyone said protect program over bricks and mortar. You can't do that forever, and we have done that for far too long. We need to be spending more. We have to be willing to increase our debt service. It's currently closer to 3%. Many of us have talked about it being closer to 5%, so that we can move forward with many of the projects that we would like to. However, I believe if we're going to be looking at serious renovation or replacement of any of our elementary schools, that's going to have to be with the debt exclusion override. We're not going to be able to manage that within our current budgeting.
Ruthanne?
Yes, Tom, you asked about what the appropriate policy is with our debt. Unfortunately, we haven't been doing it correctly, and we haven't been doing it correctly for a long time. We had started with the rule of thumb that we were going to use 3% of our revenues towards debt. It's actually, just to bring you up to date, it's actually at 5% right now because the new Newton North is beginning to kick in.
Right.
The goal of debt is to try to use long-term capital against long-term assets. We've been underfunding those long-term assets for a long time, but we also want to keep a AAA rating from Moody's. When the Citizen Advisory Group did our work, it's clear that we can probably move up to 7% of revenues and still keep that AAA rating. And I urge us to do that, but keep in mind, you still have to pay it back.
Absolutely.
The interest and the principal will affect our operating budget and force us to make difficult choices in other areas. I think we should do it, but it's not easy.
Jeff?
Well, I started. I'll leave it at that.
Sydra? Anything to add?
I think that we have to go forward and pay more attention to our buildings. One of the other accomplishments that I like to point to is the fact that I pushed the Public Facilities Committee, and therefore the mayor, to go out and get an ESCO, which is an energy service company, which allows the company to come in and propose work to be done that is paid for out of the energy savings. So we are getting some work done in that manner without a direct layout of our own funds. There are many ways to go about moving things forward, but we need a much more aggressive program for the maintenance of our buildings, and that's where a lot of your debt comes in.
Ruthanne?
The only thing I would add is one of the critical elements that we're missing right now is the Board of Aldermen unfortunately has not okayed the use of funds to get an inventory of our
So
buildings.
I was the only one who voted for it.
Good for you, Sydra. We desperately, to be able to have a
Absolutely.
thoughtful capital asset management plan, you have to actually know what condition your capital assets are in. First basic
You're absolutely
fundamental
right.
step.
Okay. This has been a great discussion, so I'm going to throw my own question in here. Okay. We talked about negotiating with the contracts. What are the unions looking for? I mean, what do you think would be a realistic settlement between the city and the unions? If that makes sense to you. I mean, it's always going to be give and take. They're going to, if they're not going to get their 3%, they're going to want something in return, I would assume. So what do we have that we can, what are we bargaining with, I guess is my question.
Financially, very little right now. I did spend 8 years on the school committee before joining the Board of Aldermen, and in that role, I was one of the people responsible for the negotiations. Although I never served on the negotiating committee, I was called in, certainly in the 4 years as chair, to help direct things and to do some conflict resolution. One of the things that we need to remember is that many of our employees, are suffering in this economy as well, so that finding ways in which their dollar can stretch more becomes an important issue.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, one way is to look at the possibility of changing healthcare.
Okay.
And the GIC, which is the government, the state government policy, which is an excellent policy, may, and I say may because that's important for us to understand, there is a broad array of program, and the most expensive is the indemnity program. And you're not allowed to limit the options. If you go in that direction, you're not allowed to limit the options. So that if all of our employees chose the indemnity program, it would cost us more, not less. So looking at ways that you can stretch things. For a while, we were doing drugs from Canada, which was a significant cost savings and very appreciated by many of our employees. It needs to be creative. There isn't an easy answer here, but I think we all need to remember that their bills are going up as well.
Let me try to get everybody, Ruthanne, can you quickly?
Compensation is the key question, Tom. You hit the nail on the head. It's 80% of our budget, and we're going to have to find a way to moderate growth while still recruiting and retaining employees. So it's a key function.
Jeff?
I'm a former union negotiator. I formed the union. I was a shop steward. I negotiated contracts on the other side. And it's terms and conditions. What can you offer in exchange for the money? The fact is that you won't be laying people off. Working circumstances, the way in which you structure the day, other benefits that
I'm
teachers
sorry,
want.
I got to wrap up. I want to thank everybody watching New TV. Thank you, Four Corners. These three people, two of them, you can vote for two people citywide. I hope you go out and vote on November 3rd. I want you all to search for Veracity. Thank you very much, and see you November 3rd.